It started a few weeks ago. I was cleaning up around the house on a Saturday morning when I noticed a small slip of paper on the kitchen counter. At first, I thought it was a grocery list my wife must have left, but when I picked it up, all it said was, "Do not read the notes." I stared at the message, confused. It wasn't my wife's handwriting or anyone else's that I recognized. The only other person with a key to our house was my brother Joe, but he was away on a business trip. Where did this weird note come from? I meant to ask my wife Cindy about it when she got home from the gym, but then I got distracted and forgot. That is, until a couple of days later. I was doing laundry, and I pulled a shirt out of the hamper. A piece of paper fluttered to the ground. I picked it up. There were only 4 chilling words. "Burn them, all of them." A cold feeling crept down my spine. This was the same creepy handwriting as the note on the counter. How did someone sneak these notes into our house without us noticing? And why were they telling me to burn notes that I hadn't even found yet? I decided not to worry Cindy until I knew more. Plus, she had been stressed at work lately, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Who was leaving these notes and why the cryptic warnings? Over the next week, I discovered more notes in increasingly disturbing places. One tucked under the lid of my work laptop, one slipped into the side pocket of my backpack, and one night, I even found one folded neatly on my pillow, as if someone had snuck into our bedroom while we slept. Each note contained dark messages like, "Do not let them find you. You are being watched. Trust no one." I started double-checking that all doors and windows were locked at night. But still the notes appeared. Cindy didn't seem to find anything odd about the notes when I finally showed them to her. She just dismissed them as pranks or my forgetfulness. But I knew I hadn't written them, and there was something deeply unsettling about those scribbled words. A sinister implication that our house was not safe, that someone or something could be watching us. Things took an even stranger turn a couple of weeks later. I woke up late one night to use the bathroom. Still half asleep, I didn't turn on the light. But on my way back to bed in the darkness, my foot bumped something. I reached down and felt the edge of stiff paper. Another note. I turned on the light and read the message scrawled there. "Do not stay here tonight, you need to leave." A jolt of adrenaline shot through me, and I looked around nervously. The bathroom was empty and everything looked normal. But my hands shook as I carried the note back to bed, where Cindy was still sleeping. Who had been here in our house while we were unconscious? And how did they want me to leave in the middle of the night? I didn't wake Cindy, deciding maybe for once I should take the warning seriously. I quietly packed an overnight bag for each of us. Then I gently shook Cindy awake. She was confused, but saw the unsettled look on my face and agreed to go stay at her sister's house for the night. I felt better once we were in the car driving away from the dark house, its windows like blank eyes. But the next morning, Cindy convinced me it was ridiculous to let anonymous notes scare us out of our home. She said she felt bad imposing on her sister so late, and the house was probably the safest place anyway. All our security alarms were state-of-the-art. Against my better judgment, I agreed to return home. However, I took the day off work to inspect every nook and cranny first, to reassure myself that nothing was amiss. I searched the whole house top to bottom but found nothing unusual. No signs of a break-in or hidden cameras, no strange doors or passages. Everything was just as we left it. For a moment I felt silly for letting paranoid fantasies get to me. Maybe I was imagining things, or the notes were just a dumb prank. By the time Cindy got home, the house felt peaceful and familiar once more. We spent a nice evening cooking dinner together and catching up after our scare. Cindy fell asleep curled against me that night as I lay awake, listening intently for anything amiss. But only the usual nighttime sounds of floorboards creaking and tree branches rustling outside met my ears. Nothing to fear. But suddenly Cindy stirred and whimpered in her sleep. I leaned over her to see if she was okay. In the dim light, I could make out her eyes darting back and forth beneath closed lids. She must be having a nightmare. "Cindy, wake up," I said softly, touching her shoulder. She didn't wake up right away. She thrashed around and cried out louder in terror. I shook her shoulder firmly. "Cindy, you're having a bad dream. Wake up." Her eyes flew open with a gasp and she looked around wildly. "Oh my God," she panted. "It was so scary." "Shh, you're okay. It was just a dream." I smoothed her hair, waiting for her breathing to slow. "What happened in it? Do you remember?" She trembled against me. "I was here, in the house, but I was alone. And there was this thing after me. It was invisible, but I could feel it getting closer. Its presence, like an evil shadow. It wanted to hurt me. She dissolved into sobs, and I held her tightly. It wasn't real, Sin. Nothing can hurt you here. But even as I said the words, I felt a twinge of doubt. What if the thing she sensed wasn't just a dream? I thought about the notes full of warnings and sinister implications. What if something was after us? Over Cindy's shoulder, I suddenly noticed a piece of paper lying on her nightstand. My stomach dropped. Reaching over, I snatched up the paper and read the note scrawled there. It is real, and it is already inside. I wadded up the note and shoved it in my pocket. My heart thudded as I glanced around the dark bedroom nervously. How long had that note been there? And what did it mean about something being inside the house? Cindy had followed my gaze, and she saw the panic on my face. "What's wrong?" she said shakily. "Nothing," I lied. "Are you feeling better now?" She nodded uncertainly. "Let's try to get some rest." I lay back down and pulled her close, but kept silent about the latest note. She was rattled enough from her dream. Eventually, Cindy's breathing slowed into sleep again. But I did not sleep a wink that night. I strained my ears against the silence, listening for anything out of the ordinary. The creak of a floorboard, a whisper of movement, the slightest hint we were not alone. But the only sounds were Cindy's soft, sleepy breaths beside me. Yet I could not shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The notes, the dream. It was like the walls of our safe haven were cracking. A sinister force was oozing through the cracks, seeping into the very foundation of the house. But from where? And what did it want? The next day, I decided more drastic measures were needed. I told Cindy I was going to get some supplies and I'd be back soon. Then I drove to the nearest home improvement store. In the security surveillance section, I purchased several small hidden cameras and motion sensor alarms to place around the house. If someone was entering undetected, I would capture it. That evening, I set up the cameras in discrete locations: the living room, kitchen, upstairs hallway, and outside the bedroom door. The motion alarms I stashed in closets and under furniture. Cindy watched me work with a worried look, but I just said it was a precaution, and it made me feel better. But even with the cameras rolling, the following days were uneventful. The footage showed nothing out of the ordinary. No intruders creeping around leaving notes, no objects moving on their own. The alarms didn't go off either. Part of me wished they would, just so we'd know for sure. But the wait only heightened my unease, and after several days, Cindy urged me to take down the equipment. She said all this paranoia couldn't be healthy, and she missed our normal life together, free of constant surveillance. Hesitantly, I agreed to remove the cameras and sensors. But I kept checking the footage obsessively those last nights. Right until the very last camera came down, I was glued to the screen, watching the empty rooms for any sign of an intruder. But our bedroom on that final night appeared still and undisturbed on screen. Just Cindy sleeping peacefully, nothing sinister. With a tired sigh, I finally powered off the monitor and went to join her in bed. We both slept better without the subtle electrical hum of the machines around us. In the morning, I felt silly for letting our ordinary homemaking disarray worry me so much. Dirty dishes in the sink, toys cluttering the living room, beds left unmade, all perfectly normal. Cindy and I tidied up the house, then decided to treat ourselves to lunch out to celebrate our return to normalcy. We were grabbing and laughing together in the car when Cindy suddenly turned to me and said, "Oh shoot, I forgot my phone." I pulled a U-turn to head back real quick for it. I dropped Cindy off at the front door while I went to park the car in the driveway. She went inside and I followed a minute later. "I got it," I heard her call cheerfully from the kitchen. But as I rounded the corner, her tone suddenly shifted. "Honey, come here." Her voice shook now. Apprehension flooded me and I rushed to the kitchen. Cindy stood staring down at the counter, her phone clutched in her hand. When I stepped up beside her, my heart seized in my chest. There on the counter lay 5 more notes fanned out in a row. But these were different from the others. They were carefully printed in large black letters instead of scrawled, and they weren't vague, cryptic warnings. They were far more horrific and specific than any before. "I am here. I am real. I am waiting. I am hungry. I am going to feast on you both." "What the hell?" I gasped. Cold terror constricted my guts. Cindy let out a small scream beside me. She grabbed my arm, body rigid with fear. Without a word, I swept the notes into my hands and ran to the kitchen trash. I wanted to burn them immediately. but controlled myself enough to just bury them under coffee grounds and banana peels, out of sight. Turning back to Cindy, I gathered her shaking figure into my arms. She was crying now. "We should leave," she choked out. "Right now." "Yes," I agreed, heart pounding. "Pack what you need quick. We're getting out of here." We threw clothes and essentials haphazardly into suitcases, not caring about neatness for once. We took turns keeping watch in case something appeared. Every creak of the house made us jump now. In less than 15 minutes, we were lugging our bags out the front door, nearly running to the car. I wanted badly to speed off and never look back at that house of horror, but forced myself to pause once we were outside. I had to be sure. I did a quick circuit of the outside, checking for any broken windows or jimmied doors, but the house looked perfectly normal from the street. Fine home, a good neighborhood, not the sinister lair my mind pictured. As I passed the last corner, heading back to the car, the sound of trash cans crashing made me whirl around. Raccoon, I told myself, just some critters in the bins, but still I felt compelled to look. I crept over and cautiously lifted the trash can lids. At first just the usual garbage, but poking out of the neighbor's can was a dirty, crumpled piece of paper. Before I even touched it, I knew, but I picked it up anyway with trembling fingers to read the scrawled words. "You cannot escape." A cruel, cold laugh suddenly split the air and I dropped the note as if it burned. The trash cans began to rattle violently, and I stumbled back in horror. Then silence again, still and quiet street, but it felt like invisible eyes watched me from the shadows. I raced for the car, throwing myself into the driver's seat. Cindy didn't have to ask what happened. She could see it on my white face. I gunned the engine and we peeled out down the street. As I gazed back in the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller and smaller. Just an ordinary suburban home. But I knew the evil that lived within its walls. Even miles away, I could still feel its dark presence following us. Hungry, waiting. We kept driving, putting miles between us and that house. Cindy sobbed in the passenger seat, voicing my own fears. What if it follows us? The following weeks were spent in a paranoid haze. We bounced between cheap motels, afraid to stay anywhere too long. At Cindy's pleading, I reluctantly let her sister know some basics, so at least someone knew what we were going through. I wanted to protect Cindy from any more trauma, but the nightmares came for her anyway. I'd wake to her screaming and pleading for mercy from the invisible thing that terrorized her in dreams. She'd cling to me trembling after, begging me not to let it get her. It was torture being unable to make the nightly horrors stop, like it was slowly feeding on her sanity. Soon, Cindy's exhaustion and despair convinced me we had to return to her sister's home. We weren't equipped to run from this evil indefinitely. We needed help and rest. Cindy's sister Deb welcomed us with open arms. She'd always been skeptical of supernatural events, but even her tough exterior cracked when faced with Cindy's genuine terror and my grim silence. At least here no mysterious notes appeared. The thing seemed to have lost our trail for now. But we still took turns sleeping so someone was awake to keep watch, and Cindy continued waking screaming from the same shadowy presence pursuing her in dreams. Except now it hissed that it had found her, and she couldn't hide any longer. The thing was playing with us, the cat toying cruelly with trapped mice. After long days of fruitless internet searches for similar occurrences and attempts to find reasoning in madness, we turned in defeat to a psychic medium. A stranger, but Deb had heard good things from a friend after her husband's death. We had nowhere else left to turn. The wispy older woman, Madame Zara, arrived at the house within the hour when we explained the emergency. We sat uncomfortably on Deb's floral sofas as the psychic walked slowly through the rooms, closing her eyes and holding her palms out, trying to sense what we could not. At first she frowned, shaking her head like she discovered nothing. But then she paused at the window, brow furrowed. "There is a presence," she said uncertainly. "Something inhuman. It is attached to your home, I feel. Like it resides within the very walls." She trailed off, opening her eyes to look at us. "Have you noticed any signs? Unexplained writings? Items moved?" We hurriedly told her about the notes, Cindy's vivid dreams, and the sense of being watched and followed. The woman nodded along, her concern growing. "Some kind of non-corporeal entity is fixated on you," she told us grimly. "It is determined to torment and feed until you give it what it wants. Your sanity, your life force." She hesitated before asking, "Tell me, have you tried communicating with it?" I stared at her. Communicate with the evil psycho thing terrorizing us. I only mean trying to understand its motives instead of running may provide more insight into banishing it. If we could reach some sort of truce or pact. Cindy froze. You want us to reason with this monster? It threatened to feast on our bodies. The psychic held up a pacifying hand. You misunderstand. I only suggest attempting to open a dialogue. Once we know what it wants, we can proceed from there. Not everyone with abilities of this sort has purely malicious intent. I almost laughed at the absurdity of having a sit-down with the disembodied thing that wanted us dead. But Cindy's eyes had taken on a thoughtful sheen. She turned to me. Maybe we should try it. I can't live like this. The psychic gave us instructions to conduct a simple séance ritual that night. She said dim lighting, candles, and an offering symbolizing peace would draw the entity in. Once summoned, we must remain calm and kind to avoid angering it. With growing unease, I wondered if we were in over our heads, but Cindy was determined. That night, we followed Madame Zara's directions, setting up an altar-like space at the dining room table. We lit candles and incense with unsteady hands. I kept glancing around, braced for something horrific to manifest any second. But as we settled in with quiet, even breaths, the room remained still. For several long minutes, we sat waiting in tense silence for a sign of the entity's presence. Nothing happened. Just as I was about to suggest giving up, the candle flame suddenly quivered, though there were no drafts. A faint scratching noise came from the direction of the kitchen. Cindy's breath quickened, and I had to resist the urge to bolt from the room. We exchanged frightened looks, but remained seated at the table. This was it. No turning back now. The scratching intensified, becoming a thunderous banging that shook the walls. The table itself began to rattle violently beneath our hands. Cindy shrieked, and I had to fight every instinct not to run. Then, as abruptly as it started, the chaos ceased. The candles burned calmly again in the sudden silence. Had we scared it off? But the stillness felt watchful now, like some presence was waiting. I licked my dry lips to try speaking again. We just want to understand. If you tell us what you want, maybe we can help you move on from here peacefully. A low, gravelly voice responded from the empty air. I want to feast. Cindy whimpered and fresh tears shone in her eyes, but I pressed on. You want to feed? On us, our life forces? Yes, came the chilling hissed reply. Is there no other way? I pleaded into the dark. You are scaring innocent people. We never harmed you. Please, can't we resolve this without more torment? A long pause followed. I held my breath, praying we had gotten through. Then the entity spoke again in a cold rumble. No, I need life. I hunger for it. I will not stop until I devour every last drop from your fragile bodies. I have already invaded your minds and your dreams. You cannot resist me. The table jolted violently again, and this time I heard the unmistakable sound of drooling hunger, wet, savage pants of breath, like a rabid animal waiting to lunge at our throats. All pretenses of civility vanished. We leaped from our chairs and sprinted for the safety of the hallway. A roar of rage shook the walls behind us. Heavy footsteps pounded in pursuit. We crashed through the front door and kept running, not stopping until we were in the car speeding away down the night road. In the rearview mirror, I thought I glimpsed inky tendrils of shadow seeping from the house, grasping for us futilely. Whether real or imagined, it was enough to make me floor the gas pedal, putting as much distance between us and that horror house as possible. We didn't dare return again after that disastrous séance. Clearly, no reasoning or empathy would satisfy the evil entity's appetite for suffering. It was simply a predator toying with helpless prey. With Deb's help, we arranged a flight out of state the next day. She promised to have the house leveled and the land cleansed. It was the only way to be certain the thing could never torment anyone else. We tearfully thanked her for her support through the ordeal. But as Cindy and I boarded the plane far from that suburban street we once called home, I knew in my gut we were not truly free of it. Such cunning malevolence does not give up the hunt so easily. It had our scent now. No matter how far we ran, the darkness could find us again. And one day soon, when we least expected it, those hungry, inhuman breaths would be panting down our necks once more.